Alright, today I want to talk to you guys about Maiden Abyss and, more importantly, the egregious secret behind the village of Irruburu. But before we get into that, I do want to let you know that this video will not contain any manga spoilers for Maiden Abyss. So if you're into anime only, there's nothing to worry about. With that being said, let's get right into it. I want to start by looking at the village of Irruburu from the same perspective that the story first presents it to us. This way, we can understand exactly what kind of ecosystem is built upon the village's hidden sins. When we first enter the village, it feels like a breath of fresh air for our gang of adventurers, which include Riko, who is literally a little girl with no powers or abilities, Reg, who is a cyborg boy that is practically indestructible and acts as the muscle of the group, and Nanachi, who is stronger than Riko but weaker than Reg and has the greatest understanding of the abyss and how to survive within it. At first glance, the village seems like heaven compared to the rest of the abyss. Strange but friendly creatures inhabit the place, speaking in a bizarre language. There are shops, inns, makeshift beds, and even bathrooms. Well, maybe not bathrooms, but most importantly, the village feels safe, a priceless commodity in the merciless landscape of the abyss. However, as I've been hinting so far, this calm and peaceful exterior isn't really what it seems. And our first confirmation of this is what's known as the balancing event. The balancing event is the village's unique and horrifying way of maintaining order. If someone disrupts the balance of value, whether by stealing, harming someone, or taking something without proper exchange, the village itself retaliates. And we're not talking about a slap on the wrist. The punishment is strict and brutal, taking something of equal value from the offender. This could mean losing a nail, or losing a limb, or an organ, or even your life. When Riko and her friends witness this firsthand, the village's entire aura shifts. It becomes clear that the friendly atmosphere, the bustling shops, and the illusion of peace are all a facade, built on something much more dangerous and far more appalling. The balancing event itself reveals the brutal truth that this village isn't a sanctuary. It's a prison built on fear and sacrifice, where the residents, known as the Narahate, have no choice but to abide by its laws. However, these laws are not without logic. They, along with the entire village, are built upon the concept of value. In Irruburu, everything revolves around value. It's not just about material goods. Here, value encompasses a person's essence, their emotions, their memories, and even their physical bodies. And nothing is free, not in cost and certainly not in personal liberty. You see, the Narahate are trapped within the village and will die immediately if they try to leave. They are forced subjects of this harsh value system that forces them to be in constant awareness of their worth, both to themselves and others. As Riko, Reg, and Nanachi spend more time in the village, they begin to connect the pieces and notice something unsettling. The village itself feels alive. It reacts to events. It enforces laws and seems to have a will of its own. And this is where the story begins to unravel Irruburu's darkest secret. You see, the village isn't just a collection of homes and shops. It's a living entity, born from unimaginable pain and tragedy. However, its origins are tied to a much deeper story that is tied to the Ganja Corps. The Ganja Corps were a group of explorers who descended into the abyss in search of the Golden City, a mythical place that promised the fulfillment of their deepest desires. However, their journey was one of desperation and suffering. They were a group of outcasts that had basically been given up on by society. Their expedition was viewed as a suicide mission, and the majority of members knew that they would never see their homes again. But on their journey, when they reached the land around the abyss, known as Orth, they found a young girl from a native tribe that had been abandoned because she was cursed by the abyss to be barren and never conceive. Her heartless tribe beat her and left her as they prepared to sacrifice her to the abyss. The girl's name was Irruburu, and the Ganja Corps took a liking to her and cared for her as their own as they themselves descended into the abyss. However, one member of the group specifically, named Vueko, really took a liking to her. She adopted the role of a mother for Irrumuru and cared for her in a way that no one had ever cared for her before. Irrumuru was stunned by the motherly love that Vueko showed her, and she quickly and happily became like a daughter to Vueko, who became the mother that Irrumuru never had. However, in a show like Main Abyss, joy and love like this can never go untainted. Eventually, the Ganja corpse reached the sixth layer of the abyss, which, although not being the end of the abyss itself, it was the location of the Golden City that they had set out in search for. They also learned that upon reaching the Golden City, they would never be able to leave, because the abyss's curse would immediately kill them if they ever tried to ascend. So, they decided to make a village inside the abyss, where they could all live peacefully now that their treacherous journey had ended. But tragedy struck, and disease ravaged the explorers. Countless people died, and Irrumuru was hit especially hard by the disease. Vueko, in one of the greatest portrayals of motherly love that I've ever witnessed in media, did everything in her power, despite being sick, hungry, and tired, to care for Irrumuru and keep her and the rest of the village alive. But despite all of her efforts, things weren't getting any better. People, including Irrumuru, were getting closer to death, and Vueko herself was running out of strength. But as if they had been blessed by God, right before everything fell apart, the group's scavenging team found a cradle of desire, which was said to provide the user with their greatest wishes. And Vueko argued that the cradle should be given to Irrumuru, believing that her pure heart would use it selflessly without being corrupted by greed. Due to Vueko's status and role in keeping everyone alive, they agreed. However, this was a fatal mistake, because even though Irrumuru may have had the best intentions and the purest heart, she still was only a child, and the Cradle of Desire was a very corrupt and dangerous tool that had a drawback the Ganja corpse were unaware of. You see, the Cradle of Desire was meant to only be used for the most simple wishes, because if you allowed it any space for interpretation, it would twist and corrupt your wishes in the most vile of ways. And Irrumuru, who was only a child, had practically no understanding of this. And how could she? When you're a child, you want to be an astronaut, a soldier, a doctor, an athlete. You have infinite expectations and infinite potential. And even though we never get to hear Irrumuru's exact wishes, we can make an inference based on this line of reasoning in the events that follow. She probably wished for everyone in the group to be healthy and well fed, for Vueko to be safe, and for herself to be able to give birth. Even though Irrumuru was very young, she had a sort of obsession with birth and motherly love in a very innocent way. Her entire life was ruined because she was unable to conceive, and even though her mother abandoned her, she'd been practically adopted and shown motherly love and affection by Vueko, and that made everything seem alright. This only strengthened her desire to have her own children, that she could care for and give the same affection that had made her life worth living. But, as you can see, a child's wish is not very straightforward, and this gave the Cradle of Desire plenty of room to warp and corrupt Irrumuru's wishes, and corrupt and warp it did. After the wish was granted, the disease was magically cured, but Irrumuru became fused with the artifact and began mutating over many days, until she became immobile and disfigured. But now she could give birth, although her children were not human. They were small, strange creatures missing vital organs that always died within the first few days. This brought immense pain and suffering to Irrumuru, who cared little about her own body but deeply loved her children that were alive but had no way of surviving on their own. But things did not stop there. The Ganja corpse were still hungry and on the verge of starvation until Wakizan, the main leader of the group, hatched a plan and secretly fed the meat of Irrumuru's dead children to the entire village. Everyone ate the meat and were filled with strength and vitality. But more meat was needed, and so they began killing Irrumuru's children prematurely because they were destined to die anyway. Of course, this was kept a secret from both Weko and Irumyuui, but during this time, throughout Irumyui's cruel and gradual mutation, Weko always stuck by her side, even when Irumyuui was unrecognizable and could barely see or speak. Weko was there, bringing her love and comfort. But things got even worse when Weko and Irumyuui learned the truth about the meat that had been sustaining the village. Irumyuui became inconsolable, and she began mutating at an accelerated rate. Soon, part of her chest opened up, and a second cradle of desire could be seen inside of her. We learn that this cradle of desire had secretly been fed to her by Wakizan in order to keep her alive and sustaining the village. Although this cradle only corrupted Irumyuui further and made her wishes more complex and up to interpretation for the malevolent cradle. Many of the members of the Ganja team recognized Irumyui's transformation as a form of judgment, their punishment for the atrocities they'd committed by eating her children. Because of this, they requested that Irumyuui eat them. But remember, at least part of Irumyui's wish was to keep the whole Ganja Corp safe. Because of this, once she'd consumed all of the Ganja Corp members, they were simultaneously reconstructed and turned into the Narahate mentioned earlier in the video. And Irumyuui herself was transformed into the physical village of Irruburu. The trees, the houses, the shops, the very ground that our main characters walk on upon entering the village is Irumyuui, and she is alive. Through all these years, she has been suffering while keeping the Narahate safe and enforcing the value system to maintain peace and order. While everyone else who is part of the Ganja Corps has moved on and even begun enjoying their new lives in the village, there are still two characters who have not. One being Weko, who has subjected herself to darkness, living all alone in a hole at the center of the village, all so that she can care for and love the spirits or essence of Irumi's children, that Irumi herself can't be there for due to her lack of a human form. Even after all that's happened, and all the suffering that both characters have withstood, Weko doesn't leave Irumyuui. Instead, she stays with her, and even carries part of her burden in one of the most beautiful and motherly portrayals of love and sacrifice that I've ever seen. The second character that has not moved on is one that I've purposefully not mentioned until now, and her name is Thapta. Thapta was the final child birthed by Irumyuui, and was part of her wishes granted by the second cradle of desire. She was also the only child conceived in perfect health with the ability to live on its own. But not only that, she was also born with immense power and strength, along with the innate desire to kill the Narahate who had exploited her mother. But due to a spiritual wall protecting the village, called the Absolute Boundary, Thapta was unable to. That is, until Reg came along and used his energy cannon arm, deemed the Incisorator, to blast a hole through the Absolute Boundary, allowing Thapta to decimate the Narahate and indulge in vengeful carnage. However, once Thapta entered the village, she not only killed countless Narahate, but she also broke the value system, because in Irumyui's eyes, her own child had an infinite value, which made the Narahate's value worthless by comparison. This causes the village to collapse in on itself, as it no longer has any value outside of Thapta. And as if that wasn't enough, the destruction of the value system removed the entire absolute boundary that had been protecting the village, allowing sixth layer species like the turbinate dragon to begin decimating the leftover rubble. In the end, Irumyuui finally dies, and her suffering ends alongside her countless half-born children and her adoptive mother, Weko. The only people who are left living are Reg, Riko, Nanachi, and Thapta. But now that the Narahete are dead, Thapta is finally free of her own wrath, and she is able to live on as her own being, allowing her to carry on Irumi's legacy and fulfill her dream of being a good mother who birthed a healthy child that could live on its own. Now, feel free to wipe your eyes after that beautiful but agonizing story. But I want to take a moment to analyze the ending and explain why it isn't quite as sad as it seems. Hopefully, I can also clear up some confusion and missing context surrounding Irumy's wishes and their paradoxical nature. Let's begin with the latter. The entire point of Irumy's wishes lie in the fact that she is a child, and no matter how pure her heart may be, she cannot articulate or choose a single simple and clear desire. Part of Irumi surely loved the Ganja corpse. They took her in as one of their own and saved her from the horrifying fate of being sacrificed. But another part of her must have hated them for their betrayal in killing and consuming her own children. These two conflicting emotions are reflected in her actions. She creates Fapta, a being with an innate desire to avenge her by massacring those who wronged her. But at the same time, she creates the absolute boundary to shield the very people that she resents. This contradiction is key to understanding Irumy's character and her wishes. It's unreasonable, chaotic, and heartbreaking, exactly as one would expect from a child like Irumi, who is overwhelmed by pain and longing. She wants to protect the Ganja corpse for the kindness that they showed her, but she also can't forgive them for the atrocities that they committed against her children. And how could she? She is torn between two instincts, and like most children, she is unable to choose, resulting in the creation of two opposing forces. The Narahate, who represent her desire to protect the Ganja corpse, and Fapta, who embodies her thirst for vengeance. This inner turmoil leaves ample room for the cradle of desire to distort her wishes further. The distortion of Irumy's wishes also explains the horrifying transformation of her motherly form. While it's likely she wished for the ability to have children, as a child herself, she probably rushed in a moment of excitement and failed to lay out any specifics regarding her own body or the nature of the children that she would bear. The cradle of desire, in turn, took her vague wishes and twisted them into the most horrific manifestations possible. Ultimately, Irumyui and Fueko's story is a tragedy, but there is closure in the end. Each gave purpose to the other. Fueko's unconditional and motherly love was fully reciprocated by Irumyui, and they died together, free from the torment that they had endured for so long, and their love and legacy were passed down to Fapta. In this way, their story, though painful, ends with a sense of fulfillment and joy.